Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Udayan Misra, and I work at ICIMOD as Communications Office. I'm here with my team from ICIMOD. Miss Annie there, Head of Communications is there. My colleagues Susmita and Bhavna, and also Mark is at the back. Thank you for joining in. So this is the first uh, event that we're organizing at the Crashbook Pavilion today as a part of our engagement with the Crashbook Pavilion. So we'll have a few other events lined up today and also on 10th of December. So 5 and 10 are the events, are the days that we'll be having events at the Crashbook Pavilion. So this event wanted to start with sort of a not so sort of a formal, kind of high level event, but then very interactive engagements and conversation with the filmmakers, the creative communicators, and also um, uh, uh, the champions, Green Mountain champions, pioneers. So what we'll do is we'll do it. So I'll start this first, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague Sarisa, a filmmaker who's come from UK, and she represents an organization called Sati, right? Yeah, so Sati is focused on inter-regional and cross-stakeholder engagement in climate science, resilience, and adaptation studies in mountain regions. And she set up this project while researching at the Cambridge University in 2018. And it has since evolved to engage across research, policymakers, innovators, industry leaders, and communities. And she's come here with a very interesting film. It's about 30 minutes. So that would be the start of our event today. Before we head into screening a shorter version of the films made by another filmmaker who had joined us, Mr. Craig. He comes from Legion Media. He's the executive producer and director there, and the film that he I think started working on since a few years ago is called the Last Glaciers, and it also has components of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region that he came to our region and interacted with us. So I'll let Craig, talk more about the film later, uh, and also maybe I think I'll let Sarisa talk about her film as well. Uh, do we do that after the
Yes,
film?
I was thinking we can do is I'll show a kind of Alps perspective,
Okay.
and then Craig will show a Himalayan perspective, and then we do a kind of round table discussion.
Okay.
Because we have,
Right, right. Yeah, Annie. Exactly. So that will be the later part of the panel.
Really interactive with the audience too. I think it's important.
Yeah, yeah. And also thank you, Dr. Carolina Adler, for joining this morning session in a very short notice. She's the executive director of Mountain Research Initiative, and also our respected board member of the Board of Governors of ICIMOD. Thank you for joining in, Carolina, and thank you, Craig, for also joining in, and thank you, Sarisa, for leading this whole engagement this morning. So what we'll do is we'll start with the screening of the film, The Green Mountain Pioneers, and then after that we'll follow up with the conversation with the speakers and also some engagements with the audience.
And also just to clarify, I'm definitely not a filmmaker by trade at all.
All right.
First ever time making a film.
Okay.
I actually work in sustainable finance full time at being Paribas.
Okay.
And this is all on the side in terms of a project that was aimed at trying to get people that like the outdoors and the industry and the communities to engage on climate solutions.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Kind of project to bring advocacy and bring solutions to people that are needing hope for everyone.
Sure. Thank you for adding that context. So, Amy, would you mind starting the film?
I'm standing on a graveyard of ice, on the Mer de Glace at the back of Mont Blanc. This glacier is receding at one of the fastest rates on record. It's in a really vulnerable, fragile state because of climate change. And I'm here to find out why, but also to meet the pioneers at the forefront of climate action solutions. That's across government and policy, innovation in communities and industry, and scientists that are trying to study and understand this issue. My name is Sarisha Mann, and I'm here to show you the Green Mountain Pioneers. These people are creating a sustainability revolution in mountain regions and creating solutions for a greener or resilient future. We'll be trekking different parts of the Tour de Mont Blanc, over 100 miles across the mountains, to try to understand how we can create a more sustainable future together. I've been searching for leaders in sustainability across mountain regions since 2018, and that's brought me here to Zellamsee Kaprun in Austria. I want to learn what makes them a role model for sustainability in mountain regions.
So Zellamsee Kaprun has been working on its sustainability for a couple of years now. We started with figuring out where we could have the biggest impact. 70 to 80% of CO2 footprint come from actually arriving here. So that's where we started right away. So basically with our mobility card, we make it very easy for people to get from A to B, and they don't have to pay for it. If you don't have to take your car, you're not polluting.
Zellamsee Kaprun is connecting tourists, companies, and communities to solutions that tackle the climate crisis. It's creating sustainability strategies now and is one of the first climate and energy modelling regions in tourism in Austria.
So we are a modelling region for sustainable tourism where other regions all over Austria and all over the Alps can learn from. We take experts for renewable energy kind of topics, for changing heating systems, installing solar power panel structures on buildings. And we bring them here and we offer their knowledge to companies in the region, for hotels, for shops, for restaurants, for whatever.
They've implemented resiliency strategies across energy, infrastructure, mobility, and involving their local citizens in creating a more sustainable future. One of the local citizens is Matthias Leitner, a former freeride skier who's doing something revolutionary with his family hotel business.
I concentrated with every change we do in the hotel to do it in a sustainable way. For the guests also gets more and more important to know where the hotel gets its resources. If it's energy, if it's food, whatever, the guests want to get explained where you get it from. It's crazy to see what we produce by our own and what economic difference it also makes for our business.
So using regional food and ensuring that it's sourced locally is more sustainable. It shortens the transport emissions, but it also supports local businesses and farmers. Sustainability can create environmental, social, and economic opportunities for communities and companies.
Was wir wollen, ist in Qualität investieren. Was wir wollen, dass wir in Energieeffizienz investieren und diesen Weg werden wir ganz konsequent in den nächsten Jahren weitergehen. Wir machen sehr viel zum Thema Nachhaltigkeit, nicht weil wir es müssen, sondern weil wir von diesem Weg überzeugt sind. Wir dürfen in einem wunderschönen Naturraum arbeiten und leben und diesen Naturraum wollen wir bestmöglich auch in die nächste Generation übergeben. Und dementsprechend agieren wir, weil wir es wollen, nicht weil wir es müssen.
Ich glaube, der Vorteil und die Notwendigkeit für die Zukunft liegt im Thema Nachhaltigkeit. Wir betreiben unsere Seilbahn- und Liftanlagen, genauso wie die Schneeanlagen, mit ausschließlichem Ökostrom aus 100% erneuerbaren Energiequellen.
Given that you're kind of representing the tourism sector and the policy perspective there, what do you think the urgency is for policymakers to address sustainability in terms of the increasing impact of climate change on some of these regions?
So basically, the tourism is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world, and tourism is also a very important income for many regions and cities. Our guests love that nature and going to the mountains and everything, yeah. But also the inhabitants need the tourism there or need something there, because if there are no tourists coming, they don't have any jobs there. So they would need to commute to a bigger city or even to move to a bigger city, and then that valley would be more or less dead. So, of course, that is really important to focus on sustainability, not only the ecological one, but also, of course, the social one and the economical one.
That means tourism is at the heart of the economy and community in many mountain regions. But climate change has significant impacts on these places. Climate change increases temperatures, melts glaciers, and shortens winter seasons. To survive, mountain regions and citizens will need to adapt. Climate change threatens the livelihoods of communities who depend on tourism. Multi-seasonal tourism beyond winter can help provide jobs all year round. This benefits the economy of the region, its citizens, and creates opportunities to adapt to the impacts of climate change.
The more people can get out into the mountains and see that and see it at different times, it's not just a winter playground, it's an amazing place at all times of the year. I think the more that people see it in different times, the more likely people are to protect it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the game. What is this game? How do we win it? How do we cheat? How do we get ahead? But this is a game where we all work together for a common goal. I'm going to start explaining what this game does. The participants are invited to choose the most relevant solutions from a climate change perspective, and keep in mind the specific of the fictional territory. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different themes. So there's tourism, there's health, there's industry, there's forest, there's social action, okay?
Industry is doing it, so I'm copying industry.
But we are not the right group for that. We have to
if you don't have a clear destination, if you don't have a clear vision, something that you can draw on, a picture of what you want at the end, it's really hard. Like, for example, with this game, so many different facets, but you get drawn into different areas because of a lack of a clear end goal. If you don't have the clear end vision, then it's easy to get put off course with all the complexities.
Just like there are lots of different ways to reach the top of the mountain, I think we can all have the same goal, but choose different ways to reach it. But each of us can also be empowered to make a difference in our own way.
You can see that the world is going to be quite disruptive in the next 50 years. Having a son does really, it has really changed my relationship with the rest of the world. You suddenly have a sense of much more pressure that if you can, why not go and create a better future for that child? So Reaction is a global collective of organisations that are working to make outdoor sports equipment greener. So, like, we recognised that in our community we had a lot of waste. We recognised there wasn't any real programme set up to deal with that. So we've been building a sustainable community, and we see that as a really important factor into changing how we can green the outdoor sports. It's been a really exciting journey actually over the last 3 years to watch that happen, to see how you can build a community quite easily and to see how you can do it based around something as simple as really as a circular economy.
I'd love to know more a bit about, in terms of how you see Reaction's role as redefining value when it comes to mountain regions.
Yeah, so I think Reaction redefines value in a few different ways. Our overriding goal is to change behaviours when it comes to how we treat our outdoor kit. And basically we're throwing away our outdoor kit way too early, and what we should be doing is buying once, buying well. This is kit that is built to last. We should be maintaining it, repairing it. At the end of its life, we need to be mindful about what we do with it. So whether that's through repurposing it, donating it. And the value that we've seen that's brought into the mountain community is really incredible. We have seen people really embrace this model. So not only are they thinking more sustainably in terms of their kit, but we're actually creating value within the community, because what we're doing is we're highlighting the people that have the skills, like repair skills or the creative skills to do something else with our kit. And what that means is that they've actually been able to make repair their job, whereas previously it was perhaps more of a side project.
Heather and Gavin are true green mountain pioneers. They stand out for reinventing the outdoor industry. When communities take action towards climate change, we can see a powerful impact.
So we've got 500 metre ascent within 2 kilometres. It's like a 30% grade. 30%. Tomorrow's hard.
We played the adaptation game. What was interesting when we played it was everyone had different roles and perspectives, but kind of working to a common good.
Yeah, getting people around the table that usually don't work together and think of the impact that one solution from one economic sector can have in the other.
You know, for me, we're kind of building the roadmaps and helping these destinations. We're helping at the destination level.
Do you have like a kind of solutions portfolio of things that you present to these destinations?
So what we do, we go in and, you know, as we're doing these workshops, we're building out a roadmap for them live, an priority action plan. So we have the lead partner advocate, so something that they can lead on as the tourism community, the tourism sector, can say, we can do this. We can help with building a ski rental company and help the private sector, help individuals that want to do that.
I would say the leading motivator is convenience. Over the fact that rental pricing is just cheaper than buying your outfits new, and also sustainability.
It's not really a matter of like, you know, oh, young people, you need to go create new ideas. Like, I think we have enough, but it's communicating those and communicating them effectively.
The ultimate goal is that we would certainly want to see a mountain environment that continues to strive. And one thing that we can actively do is to facilitate spaces where those exchanges and learnings can happen. So through those workshops that I mentioned, developing those networks across different mountain regions, the inter-regional exchange is what needs to happen more of, I think, more than ever. And this is something that we can support in making sure happens.
I mean, I've read a lot of your research in terms of where we are with the state of mountain regions, the scale of the climate crisis, what needs to be done on biodiversity. You know, yourself, you're one of the world's foremost experts when it comes to climate crisis and mountain regions in all contexts, not just here in Europe, but around the world. So what's the state of the situation right now?
The state of the situation right now is that we are in a place where urgency is part of what needs to inspire action. Much of what we're seeing today is changes that were projected to happen, say, mid-century or even in 100 years' time, and yet are happening within the last 10 years.
Well, I'm part of nature, so even my decisions should be taken in a harmony with the nature.
All the gear you wear and the footprints you leave, and they all have an impact. You want tools to allow you to diminish that impact.
Why can't being in nature be part of the culture of your tourism?
We did so much, we can do it. I mean, the message really has to be, we can do it. It's not something that is impossible.
I think we've done a really good job of increasing fear, but that doesn't seem to generate action in the same way.
We need empowerment. That's what we need.
And you need like a positive vision.
We have all these tools in our hands in order to boost this green transition. Because of course, we have to move from this kind of consideration that we are sad to observe climate change to a more proactive approach. Yes, this pioneering spirit to say, okay, but we are the new pioneers and we will renew this spirit with green transition ideas, with recycling ideas, circular economy ideas, because this is all ingredients for the green transition now.
Absolutely.
And we just have to face the reality and say, okay, we will tackle the issue and we will succeed.
And the reality is, like, if you look at the commercial side of things, it's pure opportunity. So like when I talk about like our industry, the recycling industry, we're going to make some cool new containing system and a pick up and drop off system. So it's got all the convenience that everybody needs to go, actually, that's
cool idea. Let's do that.
How can we make it more attractive? How can we make it more agreeable to people? That you know, take something and rather than make it something you have to do, something you should want to do. You prefer to do, yeah.
Wow, they do.
Chamois. A little chamois. He's come to say hello.
Look, there's another one over there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We know first that some species are really fragile, are endangered, and I think it's the first steps in understanding and wanting to protect it, is that we're just part of something bigger than us. Travail Mont Blanc is a non-profit based in Chamonix for now over 25 years, with like a double mission. Is first to study the alpine ecosystems, the biodiversity, and especially the impact of climate change on flora and fauna. And the second mission is how to connect this information with the science and society, and how to diffuse this knowledge to the bigger public and decision makers.
The main report on climate change in mountains is up to 84% of endemic plant and animal species in mountains are at risk of extinction. We really need collaboration for meaningful, bigger-sized adaptation action and to increase the resilience of mountain communities. One key stakeholder in this is the financing community and the climate financing, the funders, banks, development banks, and so on. Because we know the problems of climate change in mountains. We know the problems, the development problems of mountain communities worldwide, be it remoteness, be it lack of infrastructure. And we also have a lot of the solutions ready in these portals or in different publications and research results. What is missing is seed funding, microfinance, different grants for communities, for entrepreneurs, for startups to implement these solutions in mountains.
Finance really has to get on board to support a sustainable economy. One of Europe's largest banks is BNP Paribas, and they're pioneering the climate finance movement. They've already financed over 40 billion euros to support companies transitioning towards a low-carbon economy. And by 2025, they've got targets to support 350 billion in sustainable bonds and loans towards environmental and social issues.
You've been at the forefront of mobilizing action from companies and investors when it comes to driving change and driving a sustainable future.
Global warming is here to stay. It's going to accelerate. We know it's going to be exponential, and adaptation is required today to make our world okay to live in the upcoming 50 years. So, and the last key concern for me when it comes to adaptation is water. Water has become a scarce resource, especially in countries where there's lots of people and not enough infrastructure. So I do believe a lot of action and finance need to go there.
When we look at how we have to come up with solutions for that, so much of the narrative historically in finance has been focused on mitigation, but clearly this importance on adaptation is critical, especially for mountain regions. Yes. It's the fresh water source for so many people around the world, and yet it's not something that we heavily invest in or actually engage on as an industry to date.
Glaciers are growing more and more important for us because they are a source of hazards in mountain. They are a source of clean water, and third, because they are beautiful. And so for the tourism, they are a very important resource.
The motivation of tourists to come to see a glacier like the Mer de Glace is the phenomenon that we call last chance tourism. They want to come to the Mer de Glace to see it by their eyes. Another dimension is the idea to understand what climate change means. People heard a lot about climate change, but do not see concrete consequences of climate change. And so for some people, they want to come to see the concrete consequences of climate change. And the last dimension is relating to the idea to share glaciers that is perceived as a heritage thing, you know, that people want to share with future generations.
When I came here to go walking on the glacier with the crampons and the ice axes, we took the ladders from here. Level was here for the glacier, and now it's all the way back there. You can't even see any ice here. It's completely gone. There's no deep rivers, there's no steep slopes of ice, there's nothing, it's just rock. I was here in 2014, walking significantly higher where the ice level was, and now, quite frankly, it's in a really vulnerable, fragile state because of climate change. We've seen the scale of the climate and biodiversity crisis in mountain regions such as the Alps, and spending this time meeting the pioneers at the forefront of solutions gives me a lot of confidence. We have to really take our responsibility seriously to protect these landscapes that we love.
Our mission statement is to make sure that we try and make people's visits to the mountains as sustainable and as responsible as possible.
I'm here to show young people and people in general that there is hope.
My mission is to help the outdoor and fashion sector to transition into the circular economy.
I'm here to reduce the overproduction of outdoor gear through circular concepts like rental and resale.
I would like to achieve the full green transition of the alpine territories.
And it's my mission to connect people more with oneself, with others, and with the nature.
Yeah, thank you for your attention. While the credit rolls on, just like to thank Saria for bringing this film to our attention and making it available for us to play here. So what I'll do is just quickly do the screening of short version of the sort of clip of the film that Craig has made, and after that we'll follow up with the panel as suggested, right? Okay. Amy, if you could put in the number 2 and number 3 in the key.
If I can just say while we're waiting for that,
Yeah.
the Cayman Islands government has made a similar film to the version C that others are doing. So I'll just pass it around. There's a bunch of QR codes on this. We make the best use of this recycled paper as possible. But there's a QR code to the one I think it's Stadium Foods. It's a sustainability found in Grand Cayman. And so I'll pass that around. Yeah, just invite you to watch it at your leisure. You'll really love the Cayman Islands and the conservation efforts. To protect the biodiversity and the overseas territories as a whole, home to over 95% of the UK's biodiversity. So,
This high mountain village once had hydroelectricity. But since the glacier vanished, so too has the hydropower. Villagers here have been working with ICIMOD scientists to monitor the retreating glacier and its effects on local communities and their businesses.
Tell me what you've noticed in your lifetime about how the mountains are changing with the climate.
A lot of changing of the mountain, because we cannot get to water, like man, like animal, like in some birds, very difficult to,
So you have to travel to get the water. Yeah. So what sort of questions are the local people asking the scientists?
Local people ask, we have to ask, how do we can save the glacier?
So that's a very short version of the part of the film that that is named the Last Glaciers, and we'll run another clip from it. The extended version will be screening in our exhibit booth number 20 till for 2 days more.
When I was a child, you can see this landscape on the top. Black Hill is all covered ice and snow, but now it's melting very quickly. We want to live here, but in future we have so many problems because water source is going to disappear.
Right.
Because
no more water.
No more water because from 20 years here now, 3-4 places water resource finish because this valley water resource depend on the glacier.
Yes.
So when the glacier is melting and finished, no more water.
Okay, thank you. So now I think we move to the next part of the event, and I request Saria to take this forward with the panelists. Yeah. Sure.
So we make it kind of round people we started and very So everyone for joining, and thank you Maddie and ICIMOD team for the really kind invitation. I think we're excited that we can bring this discussion in terms of the mix between all of these today. So maybe we're just starting great with you. I think in terms of the sequences that we've seen, how did you use the film? Deciding that you're an award-winning filmmaker, you made the film Pacific Ocean, and so you've got a really strong DNA of trying to use film for showing to scientists, policymakers, and others the power of protecting the landscape. So, what made you kind of come up with the project in the last place? Can you talk us through that journey of not only as a filmmaker, but also the journey of discovery of why these places are so critical for both people and planet?
We actually went into the Alps to make an extreme sports documentary, and we were there in the middle of winter, and it was brown, not white, and I couldn't believe how dry it was. And when I asked the locals and the guides and the people who were there we were working with, the extreme sports people, they said this was something been going for 30 years. And so, being curious as I am, I went to the local meteorological bureau and spoke to the guy there, and he told me that this was a trend and that the glaciers were also receding. And so I started to look into it deeply. I ended up in Hong Kong, where I was based, to do a talk on a Pacific Ocean, and there was a scientist there called Jerome Chapeletz, who was the head of the Glacier Institute, the oldest ice institute on the planet in Grenoble. And he gave a talk on the Ice Memory Project, which he grandfathered. And that was scientists traveling all over around the world, pulling core samples out of glaciers and analyzing them and being able to tell very easily what the temperatures were, what the atmospheric conditions were, and the chemicals that were in the atmosphere going back 1 million years, because it was all frozen in these time capsules. And it showed this natural oscillation that worked as the Earth spun around on its ellipse until we started burning fossil fuels, and this hockey stick just goes off the chart. And it was the first time I'd heard science presented visually with that graphic and with a story that actually made sense easily to the average person, which I consider myself to be when it comes to science. And I did research, and I just found, as I suspected, that that wasn't a story that had been told. Most of the stories on glaciers had been very dense with the science. And honestly made I know I'm a filmmaker, made my eyes glaze over within the first 10 minutes of watching them, because there wasn't a real story there that had been translated in something that people could understand. So I figured there was an opportunity to do that. So we pivoted the whole documentary from being an adventure focus to being a climate change story through the lens of glaciers, which are a great storytelling component for climate because they're visual, as you demonstrated with your film. You can see them retreating. But we didn't want to make it for scientists, because all the other films were made for scientists and environmentalists and people who understood the problem. We wanted to get people to go and see an impact film on climate that would not normally go and see one. So we kept the extreme sport elements and the adventure element in it. So it's actually, we sell it as an adventure film and we sell it as a extreme sports film. But what happens is the science is revealed as it goes on. And what we hope is that by the time science starts to reveal itself in what we think is an interesting way, we've already got the audience and they want to know more. And that's actually in the test screenings that we've done, that's what has happened. As we started filming and doing research, Jerome said to us, there are 3 places you need to go. Peru, because they've lost half their glaciers since the 1990s. You need to go to Antarctica, because that's melting faster than anywhere on the planet and is in great stress. And you need to go to the Himalaya. So I started looking into the Himalaya, and just as I started, lo and behold, this report pops up from a group called ICIMOD. And I thought, that's interesting. And I started reading it, and it was very well written and not too dense on the science. It had summaries and intros that were very easy to read. And what jumped out at me was that this third pole, as it's known, because it has the most ice on it outside the Arctic and Antarctica, was losing ice. There were 2 figures. Had lost 15% of its ice since the 1970s and would lose 2/3 of its ice if we continued on track burning fossil fuels by the end of the century. That to me was horrific. And I just said to our team, I don't care what it costs or how we do it, we're going to the Himalayan. And so we contacted the Institute and met David Malden, who was the director at that time, and many of the scientists at the Institute in Kathmandu. And we mapped out a plan of where we should go. And the suggestion was to go up to Langtang Valley and climb Yalla Peak, because from that peak, we could see so many other glaciers that were melting. And the terminology, I think, is very critical when you're storyteller. So I never use the term in the film melting, because people just see that as something that happens when you leave the fridge door open. So we use words like dying. Glaciers are dying, because when you get to the top of a mountain, we climb 6,000 meter peaks all over the world with 250 of film equipment and paragliders. And when you get to the top of a peak and you're already pretty stressed about, spending 2 weeks acclimatizing, getting all your gear ready, climbing, particularly for someone who's not a mountaineer, and I trained 12 months to be able to do this. When you get there and you see the devastation to these glaciers, these living organisms, it is really emotional. And so the idea was to convey that emotion through the film and get people to empathize, not just understand that these aren't pretty things that sit on a mountain and look great, particularly for people who don't live near them, someone who lives in Ohio or Mexico, or who doesn't have a relationship directly with a glacier. We wanted them to feel that they were losing something as well. And so the film was shot that way. And with ICIMOD's help, we were able to tell that story in the Himalaya. And it was also quite emotional because we lost our director of photography before we got there in a paragliding accident. He'd done a lot of work in Nepal and with his wife. And so his wife came with us on the trip. And she was able to give that sense of emotion from herself, having done a lot of work in Nepal and become close to the Nepalese people, which is, I mean, we saw 2 clips there, which we've provided to ICIMOD for media purposes. And so they're not really in context with what you saw, but they're the kind of people we spoke to on the journey. We spent 4 days hiking up to base camp before we got to Yellow Peak, because we wanted to tell their story. And having Cody's wife there, Charisse, to tell that story with them and to bring that empathy of the work that her and her husband had done was also very powerful in the film, and having that relationship already there. So it was critical that we had local people everywhere we went, not just the Himalaya, but Peru and in the Alps, telling the story of their personal loss and what that means, from schooling, from literally not being able to live somewhere anymore, having to go down into the city as they are in Peru, down to Lima, and having to leave everything behind is also how you get people to empathize, to get people to walk in other people's shoes. So yeah, thank you to ICIMOD and the team, because we wouldn't have been able to film that sequence without the depth that we actually did. And it's a critical part, and it's one of my favorite parts of the film.
And the film is incredible. I would really encourage you to watch it. We're doing an event later this week where Cody's going to be speaking in the Green Zone as well. We can share this in terms, but
and it's on Emirates too. If you're flying back on Emirates, it's in the in-flight entertainment system, so you can see the whole thing.
There's so many things that resonate with what you said. I think one thing that really strikes me is the idea of the emotional connection to many of these landscapes. And I think that's something that is often not necessarily as conveyed on the scientific side. But I think, Carolina, I want to bring you in because I think the work of the Mountain Research Initiative is really important in that space. I think you're working with many of the world's kind of leading scientists in mountain regions. And I think what's amazing is that, and firstly, I want to thank you for supporting the project. I think you and I have been collaborating for many, many years on kind of looking at advocacy and bringing different stakeholder engagement when it comes to translation of that science to people that need to hear it, decision makers. Yesterday you're at our event, and I thought we need to introduce you to a lot of people in the finance industry that are trying to understand physical climate risk, because scientists are really that kind of knowledge bank of what are the priorities for different stakeholders, whether it's policymakers, filmmakers, financiers, communities, industry leaders. How do you think we can translate more of that science, and what is the state of that science right now? We saw you in the film and she was amazing. She actually camped with us, and we trekked around from Switzerland across towards the French border. And so that democratization, that democratization of science and translating it feels like such an important part of the work of what MRI is doing. And credit to you, I think, for your vision in that collaboration that you see is vital.
Thank you for that. Yes, the Mountain Research Initiative is a research coordination network, 20 years operating in that space now, and thanks to the support from the Swiss Academy of Sciences and many funders as well. And my job is really essentially to connect a network of over 8,000 scientists working across many different disciplines, historians, geographers, climatologists, geologists as well, hydrologists, you name it, all of the scientific disciplines that are out there. And we try to make sure that they connect and interact with the disciplinary knowledge, but also for us to be able to combine it and repackage it in a synthesis format to tell a story, a more comprehensive story about the scientific understanding of the processes and changes we see in mountain regions. What we like about mountain research is that mountains are really a connector of all of these different strands of knowing. And what I would like to highlight, of course, is scientific, in the conventional sense, scientific knowledge is one way of understanding and knowing and observing change. And one thing that inspired me through this project also interacting beyond the scientific realm is to also connect to other ways of knowing communities such as Indigenous and local knowledge, and to respect also their way of understanding change, and for us to find ways to interact and interrelate different knowledge, because through that I think we can be more comprehensive and more culturally sensitive as well to the real needs of knowledge to promote action in mountain regions. The science world cannot do it alone. I think we need to have that connection to those stories and knowledge that is very intricate to those communities and cultures. So for me, I think the big takeaway from this experience has been collaboration beyond your normal or usual communities with whom you interact. For many years, for 5 years now, beyond more than 5 years, in fact, I was stuck in a bubble, working for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, developing the assessment report, the 6th assessment report that after almost 30 years, finally had a chapter on mountains. And I had the honor and privilege to convene my colleagues to contribute precisely to that state of knowledge. And so I was stuck talking about science and reading about science and synthesizing the science. And once we presented the report to policymakers, many of us felt, well, our job is done. In fact, the reality, the job had really only just started, because after 2 years of releasing that report, the outreach and opportunity to connect to others and to also find ways of engaging with those facts and figures through stories and to connect to people's values as well, what has been a real learning journey for me as a scientist, but also for the network. And this is something that we take now very seriously. And in fact, it is important to empower the next generation of scientists, early career researchers, who are looking to find their place in how do we contribute to the solutions? How do we make ourselves available to be part of that force? And so we would like to now engage them and give them these opportunities and communications, storytelling beyond the realm of scientific research is something that needs to be brought into that, so that we can connect with those who have the professional training to do this as well. Yes, there are lots and lots of stories to tell. We don't want the mountain research to be framed as the doom and gloom storytellers. I think we have a lot more to share. We have a lot more solutions to inspire and for us to take back to science as well. That is also a big thing that we need to be.
That's an amazing call to action in terms of the way that we can cross-pollinate knowledge as well. A couple of things really stand out in what you said. I think one is the idea of how we can kind of democratize that message. I remember reading, it's a fantastic report, by the way, the chapter that you led. I remember reading it, and it was in the campsite in Italy, because I was preparing for the interview that we did on that rock. It's actually really hard to sit on that rock, by the way. Hopefully it looks all right. No, I literally was clinging on for dear life. But I remember reading it, and I was at the back of the Mont Blanc on the Italy side, and I was in my tent, and it was quite late at night after we crossed over from France, and that was really pertinent for me, because I think, to Craig's point earlier about this emotional connection, I think actually when you look at the common value of nature that Indigenous communities have, that many of the kind of global economy leaders are now starting to position on in terms of valuing nature, and we as people that love the outdoors also value nature. And so I think some of that scientific kind of osmosis needs to happen in spaces that we're in nature. That's what felt really powerful about the project, and Craig was also a part of the trek this summer. And for me, the most beautiful part of the project was bringing people together in the outdoors. Often we all convene in spaces that are quite sterile, I guess, versus kind of places that might inspire and create a sense of wonder and awe about the value of nature. And this is why I wanted to bring in Annie, because I think your
really at the forefront of that stakeholder engagement with the project that you've launched on Save Our Snow. I think what's amazing is that you in particular, I feel this a lot, is that you've got a brilliant way of just getting people to try to collaborate together. And I think the other thing that's super interesting, to Craig's point on some of that urgency of language, you know, Save Our Snow is built upon this idea that we have to really protect these places. And I wanted to just kind of get you to share your perspective on what you see as the real mission of that campaign, and how can we all be part of supporting that process of saving, you know, the third pole. I think you mentioned about the fact that so much of that fresh water as well sits within the Himalayas, and you were there kind of showing the secrets in the film. But that affects, you know, close to 1 billion people in terms of places that rely on that freshwater resource, and communities, and not just communities, but companies, supply chains, you know, athletes that are doing kind of adventures in those extreme environments. How's Save Our Snow bringing all of those people together?
Yeah, so thank you. I joined ICIMOD in April of this year, and I come from the humanitarian background, so very used to using emotional storytelling and connection in order to advocate for change or to fundraise, get policy change. I arrived in April of this year, and it was the 70th anniversary of the first ascent of Everest in May. And we kind of spun a little bit on a dime and launched a campaign, SOS, really playing on that SOS, also because we represent the Hindu Kush Himalaya, 8 countries, very different languages and perspectives. And it was a moment of SOS, the ... Save Our Snow. You mentioned the 2019 HKH assessment report. We were also launching a month or so after that another major scientific assessment called HiWise, Water, Ice, Society and Ecosystems in the Hindu Kush Himalaya. And the key finding of that report was also around snow. So we studied quite a lot about glaciers, but we know very little about shifting snowpack, precipitation. So it was trying to kind of play on that as well, and very much trying to position it rather than trying to invite people to feel that sense of attachment. So there is stuff that is worth saving. One of it, we're sitting in the pavilion of the ICCI. They have an amazing State of the Cryosphere report, which came out a month ago. And it shows these amazing graphs. I'm not a scientist, and science is absolutely what ICIMOD will continue to do, but this is more about global advocacy, and it's very invitational. And as a non-scientist, I look at those charts, and it is absolutely breathtaking that, yes, there's a certain amount that's already locked in, but if we make emergency reductions, if we ditch dirty energy fast enough, then some of these glaciers, some of that bare rock, the debris kind of strewn empty rivers, those heartbreaking kind of scenes, as you say, of death, really, they can be restored. These fresh water sources, which contribute to the lives and livelihoods of a quarter of humanity in the Hindu Kush Himalaya, can come back to a certain extent. So it's trying to switch into, yes, the problem language, but also it's worth fighting. So Save Our Snow comes from kind of, it's essentially about trying to bring together 3 key stakeholder groups. The scientists, ICIMOD has 120, 130 researchers and scientists sitting in Kathmandu who are researching into glaciers, researching into livelihoods, researching into economies and landscapes. Increasingly, they're being called to use their voice much more powerfully. And these are one of the most trusted groups on earth. Study after study shows very little trust in media, in politicians, actually, but scientists over 70 to 72% across the world. So we need to amplify their voice. So this was about energizing our base and trying to give them more and more of a platform, giving them more profile within our channels. It also comes from a kind of, we call ourselves the third pole because it's the 3rd largest ice mass outside Arctic and Antarctic, but also to a certain extent the kind of lesser the more ignored pole, I suppose, but we're very, very populated. And that vulnerability, 240 million people living in the mountains, 1.6 billion people living downstream. That is a huge vulnerability in terms of the loss of these water sources, but it also is a phenomenal advocacy opportunity. There's a huge population who are intimately connected. They're seeing it with their own eyes, they're eyewitnesses to it, but they're also potentially electoral blocks. They vote, their voices count. And if we connect with their stories and if we amplify them, then people will actually understand better. So it's about really trying to build their voices as well. And the third constituency is, so I'm in Kathmandu working for the glaciers, working for the Himalaya mountain range and lives and livelihoods, but many, many people, thousands, hundreds of thousands come to that region or have it on their bucket list in order to get up into those iconic mountains. And many of those people come year after year after year. Before I joined ICIMOD, I spoke to an amazing man called Ed Douglas, who's written phenomenal books about the Himalayas, and he edits the Alpine Journal, which is the oldest magazine of the oldest society of exploration and climbers on Earth. And he said, we climbers, I just wanted to test it with him. He said, climbers are the canaries in the coal mine. They often spend huge amounts of time in the mountains. They see it firsthand. They live with these communities. They're often deeply affected by the ways of life that these communities live. And remember, these are the communities that have contributed the very least to climate change. They're the ones that are very most living in harmony with nature. And they've been changed by it. And they feel a responsibility. And there are phenomenal stories of climbers climbing up through, 5 years ago, it would have been solid ice, now having rivers cascading at high altitude where there should not be meltwater. And the shock of that eyewitness testimony is something that SOS is attempting to also leverage. So we launched on that 70th anniversary of the first ascent of Everest. Tenzing Chogyal Sherpa is a young cryosphere analyst at ICIMOD. He's in his 20s. He also is grandson of the last survivor of the first ascent. So his grandfather was the last person on Earth still alive from Hillary and Tenzing's successful ascent. And Tenzing has gone on to try to save the mountains that his grandfather helped conquer for the first time. So he was there, he was front of the campaign, and during those commemorative events, we also get all of the families of those first successful ascenders. We also had Helen Clark support it, and we essentially were just trying to leverage a media moment. We knew global media was going to be looking our way, and so we just wanted to make sure that at that moment, people are aware, yes, celebrate the 70 years, but also look ahead. What does the future hold for this region? And moving forward, we got the phenomenal support of Kilian Jornet, who some of you may know, an amazing Norwegian Catalan climber based in Norway, from Spain. And just as a kind of proof of concept about how these mountain athletes have a contribution to make in terms of communicating science, how that collaboration becomes more powerful, Kilian went on Sky News and spoke about cryosphere impacts to a sports audience for 10 minutes. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And we've got 300, 400 pieces of coverage just about cryosphere impacts in that small period of time. So it's an invitational piece. It's very much not business as usual for ICIMOD. Business as usual for ICIMOD is doing the science, but this is an invitation for other scientific organizations working in mountains, other brands and sports personalities who invest a huge amount in their storytelling and have huge followings to actually come on board and help us tell the story of what's happening in this region.
It's really inspirational. I think it resonates a lot with me in terms of the idea of finding common connection points between stakeholders. When I first set up Sadly, people thought I was crazy. They said, why are you bringing, the tourism sector, the outdoor industry, the infrastructure sector that make the lids, the hoteliers, the scientists, the policymakers? They were like, why would we come? Why would we be involved in your project? And what I found was that it was often this idea of how they could all connect together to help each other out in terms of what they were trying to achieve as a common goal. Many of the outdoor brands that I speak to, and I try to go to ISPO every year to try to advocate for, circular economy is a big theme in the film, because I think when you look at the responsibility that many people have that buy gear, that spend time on expeditions, that spend time in the mountains, using that idea of circular community value and actually deciding how we choose to be a more sustainable hiker, skier, climber, whatever it is really matters. But that central idea has to go on the whole value chain. So for me, what seemed really important, and this is where I want to bring Craig in, is to work with every point of influence along that particular issue. So not only getting the consumer to buy more sustainably and choose more circular approaches and more sustainable clothing or rental, or you saw a couple of examples in the film, but following that whole supply chain. And so I do talk to a lot of brands to say, what are you doing on circularity? How are you connecting it across to different models? And there's some amazing organizations that are trying to change that. And Craig, I wanted to bring you in here because I think what's really powerful about your perspective is that you do really try to work with that whole myriad of stakeholders that have influence, whether it is policymakers, whether it is companies, whether it is climate activists, youth.
Outside the film.
Outside.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
The film's become a tool.
Yes. So can you share with us the kind of the feedback from that process? You often spend time with these really large CEOs, but also with school children. And how does that spectrum of influence need to change for us to actually get the message out there?
Yeah. Well, they say make a film travel the world. People like to know about the stories themselves. And so children are an incredible resource to get knowledge out there. And when we launched a Plastic Ocean, we screened it to schools around the world first. And the thing with children is that they generally know more than their parents do about these sorts of issues. I went to schools all around the world, and I didn't have to explain the issue. When I went to banks and corporates, I have to start from the very beginning. This is the problem. This is who created it. This is why we need to solve it. This is how we do that. With kids, it's like, where are the tools? Where are the tools to fix this? And do we have to do it all ourselves, or do we have your help? And what kids do is they go home to their parents and they say to their parents, why are you wrapping my sandwiches in plastic? And the parents go, what are you talking about? And then they get the parents to watch the film. And they engage the parents because the parents want to be engaged positively with their kids. And so you get this flow-on effect going. And then the parents, many who are corporate executives and leaders, want to know the substance. Why has this escaped them? Why didn't they know about the damage their products are doing in many cases? And so then we go to the corporates and we work with banks like BNP Paribas, because finance is such a big solution. And we get influence, and we also learn ourselves. I learned so much by coming to places like COP, to doing the finance forums as well. So I then learn also how to speak the language. And it's a two-way street, without a doubt. And it gives me ideas for the next films, how to approach them and how to engage people in a way that others will understand. But my premise with all my scripts is to write them so that an 8-year-old would understand them. Because if the 8-year-old will understand them, their parents will want to understand what they're understanding as well. And then you've got a catch-all. And so I think that's absolutely key. You have to have a great script. Without a really good script with substance, then you're not going to catch people. And the interesting thing about scientists is, in the last 5 years, in my observation, they've become great storytellers themselves because they've become so frustrated with governments and corporates not listening to them. They've become emotional. And they never were emotional. I've worked with scientists for 30 years. They'll give you the research, they'll explain the data, that's it. You ask them to comment on it, they'd never do it. Now, absolutely, they will tell you what's going on. And when we flew with NASA in Antarctica, I had the lead for NASA, who's been working with satellites and the polar regions for 35 years, collecting data. He said to me, he said, I was going to buy some property on the coast in Virginia. He said, I've just realized, he said, we're measuring ice movement within 10 centimeters in the polar regions. He said, we're losing this ice the size of 2 Titanics every 10 seconds in Antarctica. He said, I realized that's not a good idea to buy property on the coast. Now, there's practical advice from a scientist based on his own research. That's the kind of stuff we need, because people will listen to that.
What's amazing, actually, there's a part in your film quite regularly which does have that check-in of normalising the science. So you show the number of swimming pools of water that would have collected.
That have melted while you've been watching the film. So through it's been a theme I've done with most of my films. I want to shock people back into reality. And so during the time they've watched the film, I'll show a graphic and I'll visualize something for them. So with the large glaciers, I've got a shot underwater of a swimming pool with the lanes. And we say, since you've been watching this film, X number of Olympic-sized swimming pools of water have melted from glaciers into the ocean. And at the end of it, it's something like 76,000. And that shocks people because they keep getting reminded, like, what am I doing sitting here? You know, that the glaciers are melting. This stuff's going into the ocean. You know, is it coming up around my house? So it's very important to have also devices like that keep people focused.
And maybe, Carolina, I know you do have to go to some negotiations at the moment. So, but in terms of, from your perspective, how do we try to foster some of that kind of translation? I think you're really powerful at trying to get people to see the solution side of things. And do you think that's where the science needs to move into, the solution space?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've been monitoring change in the mountains for many years. And I think we understand the problem quite well, right? I think by improving the scientific monitoring of these changes, it's still important to continue doing, because we are realizing that the pace of change is actually much faster than what we had anticipated 10 or 20 years ago. So that is still an important piece of the scientific work. However, we need to also be monitoring the types of solutions and implementations that are taking place right now, and monitoring, do they really meet the needs of people first and foremost, and are they implemented in a way that also addresses the key risks associated with the changes that are coming in the future, which are much larger than what we had anticipated as well, especially in mountains where the amplified effect of warming is really present. So it's important to start acting fast. But as we implement, we also don't want to create additional problems. We don't want to rush into a situation where we are also maladapting. And so we need to make sure that we are monitoring that side of the situation as well, and engaging more with communities. I think the social sciences have a huge role to play here in leading the agenda for improving the way in which we are addressing risks and responding to risk in a climate justice and equity perspective as well. I think that is something that we need to engage a lot more.
And I think when we made this film, and actually the filmmaker couldn't be here with me, Michael Shaw, but he's amazing. He's a really young filmmaker and is trying to change that narrative. When we made the film, one of the key things that we used was the graphic that was in your report in terms of some of those adaptation impacts of climate change in mountain regions. Because what's interesting is that you have a way of synthesizing it in terms of all of the major impacts, whether it is environmental, social, economic, or on the community side. And so I think it's a really powerful message to try to translate that science into several different areas. You know, on the finance side, often it's the E, the S, and the G, environmental, social, governance. But I think that when you put it to a human community level, it's a really powerful thing. And maybe, Annie, just turning to you from a closing kind of remarks perspective, how can we all leave this room with a message of hope and a real sense of agency in what we can all do? You know, in the room we've got some colleagues here from other regions. We've got my colleague from the Middle East who's looking at the finance space. We've got Mark from ICIMOD. I don't know you guys, but yeah, we've got that sense of so I think, yeah, how can we feel? That was the point for me of the film, was to really create a message of inspiration. I think the turning point was, this time last year, I didn't have an idea to make a film, never made a film in my life. I know Craig very well, and I was absolutely in awe at Craig's work. And I thought, I don't know how to make a film at all. Craig, but I think this message of hope and giving people a sense of agency was critical for me. I did want to show the science, and I hope that we've done that relatively well. But I think that duality is critical. The science, but the solutions. And what do you think is the message we should all leave?
I think it's really important to talk about this. I listen to Christiana Figueres' podcast. I don't know whether anybody else does, but she talks a lot about these two hockey sticks, right? The hockey sticks of emissions that are horrifying and going up all the time, but also the hockey stick of solutions. And I think there's a lot about language. There's a lot about making sure that we all feel energized, and we all feel like talking about this all the time is part of the solution, and raising our voice is part of the solution. Also just language around emissions. It's interesting. There's a lot of research about kind of what lands well. Actually, here, everybody will be very fixated on 1.5, 2 degrees, etc. But actually in the wider world, that doesn't resonate really. So let's talk about how we can upgrade to clean, safer, greener energy, how there is still so much that is at stake. There's still so much that is worth saving. One of my famous kind of activists that I admire is Bill McKibben, and he says, we've seen a lot of deaths. It's hard to be optimistic, right? It's hard to be optimistic at this moment on the clock of the world. So in the Hindu Kush Himalaya, just this summer, 2,000 people have lost their lives in disasters. And with every increment of a degree of warming that we avoid, there will be less tragedy. And that is what we all have to carry with us. So there's a huge, heavy humanitarian burden on all of us, particularly those of us who are here within COP, but also to just keep fighting. It's not lost yet. I just look at those ICCI graphs, they come back. That's fresh water, that's lives and livelihoods, and that's displacement that doesn't need to happen. That's permafrost that might not be lost, resulting in disasters. So please use your voice, spread the word, do collaborate. Like, surprising coalitions have so much force when the science is met with culture, with campaigning, with youth voices, with alpine voices, with community voices. It's chemical, right? It's kind of bringing things together to create more of an explosion. So please, let's collaborate to do more and move faster.
And I'm really excited to do that with all of you guys, actually. I think we've got so much potential within this room and beyond at COP to try to get that scale that's required, whether it is in investments in adaptation solutions, whether it is in people seeing amazing films that you're producing, or whether it is in people getting involved in the campaign that you're doing to bring all of the world along to save the third pole. That message of hope is really critical. And thank you all for being here to talk about that. Does anyone have any questions in the room? Do we have time to take a 2 minutes?
Very big question about the possibility to reverse some of those phenomena. How do you see that? Because I everything I've heard so far is slowing down, but reversing would be great. But is there any science behind this?
There is, but unfortunately, this is not within our timescale. Within the generation, we're talking thousands of years.
Okay.
If we were to stop emissions right now, there is a possibility, yes, to revert the loss, but this is not within the timescales of that you and I would be familiar with. We're talking centuries, if not thousands of years, in geological timeframes.
If we stop now, you've got these feedback loops that will keep going on because they're still being affected by what's happened. So you've got to factor in when those start to slow down and stop before you actually look at something's beginning to revert.
We're talking about changes that are locked in for at least this century. And beyond that is really up to what we do today. It's not just what we do today.
But I would urge you to look at the State of the Cryosphere report, because it does have this one page where it shows that you can speak to the science, but there are some areas in which it's lost, it's locked in essentially. But there are some mountain glaciers where it stabilizes, the losses do stabilize.
One thing that's really exciting though, just on that hope message, I was at and thank you Annie for this, because it was down to Annie. I attended President Macron's One Planet Polar Summit, and there was a group, and actually the UN EP Mountain Innovation Fair. And one of the things that was really clear is that there are some incredible innovators in HKH working on solutions and adaptation. So one of them was from Ladakh, and he's creating artificial glaciers. So what they're doing is they're taking the meltwater from the glaciers and pumping it back upstream, and then basically shooting it into the air. It freezes and it creates these artificial glacier structures, and they're capable of being able to supply 11,000 litres a day of water. So there are solutions there. It's not reversal, but I would say that from my perspective, the criticality is that urgency on adaptation. It's not reversibility, because as Carolina and Annie and Craig said, it's locked in. But I think the adaptation is where we have to put so much of the emphasis. You made a really good point that so many of these communities are not responsible for those emissions, and yet so much of the narrative in those communities from a Western perspective has been on mitigation. Whereas actually what we need to be hugely scaling up is adaptation investment, not necessarily forcing the discussion only on mitigation for those communities.
Yeah, and ensuring those adaptation funds actually get on the ground, because people are moving, they're reaching those hard limits right now. And at the moment, it's extremely onerous to actually make those applications through the global adaptation funding mechanisms. So how do we streamline that? How do we make sure that the financial flows are moving faster to those who are already feeling the impacts? That's something that I hope everybody's working towards here.
There's a lot of chat about that COP. I've spoken to a lot of development banks and been to discussions with them, and I feel a momentum that's much more tangible this year, maybe because of the loss and damage fund discussion, but I think that it feels that there's a much more willing engagement on that. That's it. Maybe I think we have to finish.
Thank you very so much for moderating the session, and thanks to Craig, thanks to Dr. Adler for joining us. Thanks Annie for putting it in perspective from ICIMOD and HKH as well. So this is the end of this session. So our next session here is with UNESCO. We'll be talking about our roadmap towards the International Glacier Preservation and Glacier Day 2025. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, I didn't know, maybe you remember, not